No empire ever fell to the thing it dreaded. It fell to the thing it craved. You were taught that pleasure sits at the finish line, the trophy waiting once the climb is done. Comfort, abundance, the long exhale after the grind. Work hard enough, and eventually, you get to rest. That's the story everyone hands you. It might be the costliest lie a man ever swallows. Those who truly understand power know something colder. You don't break a strong man and stripping things away from him. You break him by handing him everything he ever wanted. You don't hunt the lion. You feed it and keep feeding it until it forgets the hunt was ever in its blood. There's a name for what happens to a man drowning in comfort. By the time we're done, you'll recognize it. There's a real chance you're living inside it right now. Spring, 215. BC, an army marched out of a city, and it had lost the ability to frighten anyone. 6 months before, that same army had pulled off something history still struggles to explain. At Cannae, Hannibal's Carthaginian forces had trapped and slaughtered the largest army Rome had ever fielded. Tens of thousands of soldiers cut down in a single day, an encirclement so total that scholars still debate the mechanics of it. Rome was staggering. The capital lay open. Hannibal commanded the deadliest fighting force on the continent, men tempered by years in the field, by crossing mountains with elephants, by surviving frozen nights and winning anyway. Then they marched into Capua, Italy's second wealthiest city, and the city welcomed them with open arms. Warm baths, soft beds, wine that never stopped flowing, comfort in every form a tired soldier could imagine. According to the historian Livy, that single winter of luxury accomplished something Rome's legions never managed. The army that left Capua come spring was unrecognizable. Men who'd grown used to ease struggled the moment they had to sleep in the open again. The instant marching and hardship returned, their nerve and their stamina simply weren't there anymore. Livy described soldiers crumbling like green recruits who'd never seen combat. Desertion spiked. The killer instinct had evaporated. An old saying from that era puts it bluntly: Capua was Hannibal's Cannae. What gutted his army wasn't a blade. It was a mattress. Scholars argue over how literally to read this. Hannibal kept fighting for years after. But the ancients didn't keep telling this story for centuries because they misunderstood it. They told it because they watched the same thing happen over and over to men tougher than any of us. The pattern holds. Difficulty doesn't break men down. Difficulty is the only thing that ever forged them. And comfort, the prize you've been promised, the soft landing, is the most efficient tool ever built for disarming a dangerous man without ever drawing a weapon. Which begs a question no self-help book wants to touch. If comfort does that to a person, why does it feel so good while it's happening? The answer is already sitting inside your skull, and it has a chemical name. Most people misread dopamine entirely. They assume it's the chemical of pleasure, the burst of joy when something good lands in your lap. It isn't. Dopamine is the chemistry of wanting, of anticipation, of the forward lean right before the reward shows up. It exists to make a creature pursue food, pursue a mate, pursue the next horizon. And it spikes hardest, not at the moment of reward, but in the reaching for it. Dopamine is the engine behind pursuit itself. In a real sense, it's the chemical fingerprint of a man with a mission. Here's the part nobody explains. That engine runs on balance. Psychiatrist Anna Lemke compares the brain's reward circuitry to a seesaw, pleasure on one end, discomfort on the other. Tip it too far toward pleasure, and the brain, which above all else wants equilibrium, doesn't just enjoy the ride. It fights back, flooding the other side with discomfort to restore balance. Neuroscience calls this the opponent process mechanism, and it carries a vicious feature. The brain doesn't quit pushing once it reaches even ground. It overcorrects, dragging you past neutral into deficit. You feel that overcorrection constantly, and you've been pointing the blame in the wrong direction. The emptiness after binging, the hollowness after the climax, the Sunday night dread following a weekend of doing nothing but indulging. That gray, irritable nothing trailing every cheap high. That isn't separate from the pleasure. It's the cost of it. Same transaction, just a delayed bill. Keep tilting that seesaw. Pornography, sugar, endless scrolling. A dozen tiny hits before you've even gotten out of bed. And eventually, the brain quits resetting altogether. It downregulates. It pulls back its own receptors. It goes numb to its own wiring. Imaging research from scientists like Nora Volkov shows dopamine activity in heavily addicted brains sitting below baseline, not elevated, suppressed, weeks after the substance is gone. The man who chased pleasure without limits doesn't end up euphoric. He ends up barely able to feel anything at all. There's a clinical term, anhedonia, the inability to enjoy things that are supposed to bring enjoyment. A man stuck in dopamine deficit doesn't need stimulation to feel good anymore. He needs it just to feel ordinary, just to reach the baseline everyone else stands on for free. Sit with that for a moment. A reward system built to drive the hunt has been repurposed into something that just grazes. And a grazing animal conquers nothing. It just keeps its head down, chewing, until something with real teeth comes along. That's the gentlest mechanism in this whole story. What comes next doesn't just dull a man's drive. It rewires what he's even able to want. In 1956, researcher Frank Beach documented one of biology's strangest patterns and, only half-jokingly, named it after a US president. The setup has been repeated across nearly every species studied since. Put a male animal with a female. He mates. He mates again. Eventually he's spent, finished, uninterested, drive completely gone. Introduce a brand new female, and suddenly he's fully recharged. Not rested, restarted. The exhaustion just disappears, and the drive often roars back harder than before. It's called the Coolidge effect. Inside the brain, dopamine collapses as the animal grows satisfied with the familiar, then spikes sharply the second novelty appears. Documented in rats, bulls, birds, even snails. The drive was never really about the act. It was about newness. Now set that next to the device in your pocket. For nearly all of human history, novelty was scarce, and it cost something. A new mate, a new hunt, new ground. These things had to be earned. Your reward system evolved for a world where novelty arrived a handful of times a year, if you fought for it. Then we engineered an infinite novelty machine and put it in every man's hand for free. An endless stream of new faces, new bodies, new stimulation. Each swipe a fresh hit. Each hit teaching the brain that something better might be one flick away. Researchers studying compulsive porn describe exactly this. Not a craving for more of the same, like a typical addiction, but a steady drift toward the more extreme, the more novel, just to feel what an ordinary image used to deliver. The appetite never gets satisfied. It gets trained to demand more than reality can ever offer. Here's the part that should genuinely sit uneasy with you. A man feeding this loop isn't only wasting hours. He's reprogramming his entire wanting system around a stimulus. No real partner, no real achievement, no real life can match. He sits across from someone who loves him and feels a low static boredom he can't name. He hits a goal he worked years for, and it tastes like nothing, because his threshold for exciting has been pushed past anything the physical world can deliver. He's trained himself to be bored by his own existence. And the quiet horror is this: he doesn't experience it as a personal failing. He experiences it as the world itself going gray. He assumes the job is dull, the relationship is dull, the city is dull, that everything is somehow less than it should be. He'll spend years hunting for the external fix that will make him feel alive again, never once suspecting he burned out the very part of himself responsible for feeling anything at all. Up to now, this has sounded like an accident. Collateral damage from a world too rich for the brains we were issued. Time to stop being polite about that, because for most of recorded history, this was never an accident. It was a strategy. Go back to the oldest contest of power there is. How do you neutralize a rival you can't simply kill? You can't always remove a dangerous man. Killing him creates martyrs, ignites uprisings, invites retaliation from his heirs. Lesser rulers tried it and spent their reigns putting out fires. The clever ones discovered something better. You could disarm a dangerous man entirely, permanently, and have him thank you for it by drowning him in pleasure. It's one of the oldest moves in the playbook, and it's rarely written down because its genius is that the target is grateful while it happens to him. You take the threatening prince, the ambitious heir, and instead of a cell, you give him a palace. Companionship, feasts, endless wine, every comfort imaginable. You make his existence so soft and so saturated that the hunger that once made him dangerous simply dissolves. The man who would have raised an army is now choosing between desserts. He's no longer a threat to anyone, least of all the one who neutralized him, and he'll defend his own cage because the bars are upholstered. Defeated rulers were often pensioned into luxury for precisely this reason, so the will to fight back would quietly fade. A gilded life makes a more reliable prison than an iron one because the prisoner stops wanting out. Now, look at what surrounds you today. This isn't a conspiracy theory. Nobody in a boardroom is plotting your personal downfall. It's stranger than that. The same mechanism has been mass-produced and aimed at everyone simultaneously. Not by a single tyrant, but by an economy that discovered the most profitable thing it can do is keep that seesaw permanently tilted toward pleasure. Every frictionless app, every feed engineered never to end, every flavor lab tuned to override your natural off switch, every form of stimulation delivered faster and stronger than before. All of it converging on one result, intended or not. A population of men carrying the reward circuitry of pacified princes, defending the very thing that hollowed them out, certain they're free because no sword is at their throat. The old rulers had to capture you first. Now you walk into the cage yourself and lock the door behind you. That's the real reframe. Pleasure was never the reward waiting at the end of the struggle. For most of history, it was the struggle, the actual weapon turned against men too dangerous to eliminate outright. And the real question stops being whether the world is doing this to you and becomes something far harder to face. How much of it are you doing to yourself, voluntarily, every single day? A few thinkers wrote this down centuries ago, and we tend to ignore them because they weren't exactly fun company. Seneca was the wealthiest philosopher in Rome, an advisor to an emperor, a man who could have indulged in anything the ancient world offered, which is exactly why his warning carries weight. He wasn't preaching restraint from ignorance. He watched indulgence up close and saw what it produced. In his letters, he drew a distinction. Modern life has all but erased pleasure, the cheap, restless external rush, versus joy, the steady internal kind, earned through living well, which owes nothing to circumstance. Pleasure left unchecked, he warned, doesn't lead to more pleasure. it spirals straight into its opposite. He'd mapped the seesaw 2,000 years before anyone could scan a brain to prove it. His sharper insight concerned the body. Seneca watched wealthy Romans cushion themselves from every discomfort and noticed something. The more a man is shielded from hardship, the smaller the hardship needs to be to wreck him. Comfort doesn't strengthen, it thins the walls. A man who's never been cold falls apart over a draft. A man who's never gone hungry panics over a delayed meal. A man who has arranged his life to avoid all discomfort has unknowingly handed control of his own nervous system to anyone willing to threaten that comfort. That's not a flaw in his character. It's a description of exactly how a man becomes controllable. Anyone holding the key to his next dose of ease holds a leash he can't even see. The Stoics weren't championing suffering out of grimness. They championed it because a man who's made peace with hardship is the one man in the room nothing can leverage against him. But beneath the merely soft man lies a worse stage, one where a man stops noticing anything's wrong at all. A philosopher with a hammer spotted him coming over a century ago, and it terrified him. Friedrich Nietzsche feared one figure above the tyrant, the criminal, the nihilist, the perfectly comfortable man. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he sketched a figure he called the last man, civilization's endpoint once comfort becomes its highest value. This man has his small pleasure for the day and his small pleasure for the night. Risk, hardship, danger, eliminated. He's warm, fed, entertained, safe. And then the line that should chill anyone, he blinks. A small, contented, animal blink. No fire behind the eyes. Nietzsche said this man can no longer give birth to anything resembling greatness, because he no longer carries the inner friction needed to aim at anything beyond his own ease. What makes the last man so unsettling is that he isn't suffering. He feels fine. Tell him he's been hollowed out, and he'll look at you blankly and reach for a snack. He can't grieve a hunger he no longer has, because the very faculty that would let him notice the loss is the first thing comfort dissolved. This is why excess pleasure is more dangerous than pain. Pain is a fire alarm. It forces movement. Pleasure works silently and convinces you that nothing's wrong. A man being crushed by hardship at least knows he's in a fight. A man being dissolved by comfort thinks he's winning. That low hum of contentment, the sense that things are basically fine, that the ambitions you had at 19 were probably unrealistic anyway, and letting them go is just maturity. Examine it closely. Make sure it's actual peace, because it wears the same face as surrender, and from the inside, the two feel nearly identical. Carl Jung described an archetype the Romans called puer aeternus, the eternal boy, the man who, on some deep level, refuses to fully grow up. You know him. You might be him. The eternal boy is often charming, talented, full of potential, and that's the tragedy of it. He's always on the verge of the great thing, the novel he'll write, the company he'll start, the relationship he'll finally commit to. But, as Jung's student Marie-Louise von Franz put it, he lives a provisional life, perpetually one step from real commitment, every door left open, never planting his feet anywhere solid, because committing to one path means killing the fantasy of every other. What keeps the eternal boy aloft decade after decade? Pleasure. The steady, low-grade availability of comfort and stimulation, just enough to dull the dissatisfaction before it ever turns into the kind of desperation that forces change. Real growth requires friction. committing, failing, getting embarrassed, pushing through anyway. The eternal boy has built an exit ramp out of every one of those moments. The instant real effort gets uncomfortable, he reaches for the easy thing, the next shiny alternative, and the pressure releases. He never has to land, so he never does. Cultural critic Camille Paglia argued, controversially but persistently, that much of what men have built, towers, symphonies, engines, cathedrals, was driven by a restless energy that could never fully be satisfied and had to be redirected somewhere. Hunger aimed at the sky. Satisfy that hunger too cheaply, too constantly, and you don't free the man to create. You unplug the engine entirely. The tension that would have demanded the tower gets quietly drained into a screen instead. Writer Rollo Tomassi puts the relational version of this plainly. A man's presence, his pull, collapses the moment he gets comfortable and believes he's arrived. Comfort reads, to everyone watching him, as the absence of any mission. Lay it all out. An army that forgot how to be feared after one soft winter. A reward system that turns abundance into numbness and novelty into a hunger nothing real can satisfy. The oldest trick in power, disarming dangerous men by handing them exactly what they crave. A Stoic's warning that a soft body hands its own leash to whoever wants to pull it. A man who feels fine while being hollowed out, and a gifted boy who never lands because landing hurts. Stack it all up and you reach the conclusion nobody wants printed. Pleasure isn't the reward for power. Pleasure is the tax on it. And the people who actually hold power have always paid as little of that tax as they can. This is where most people get it backwards. They assume the man at the top indulges the most luxury, the most ease. Sometimes that's on display, because display has its uses. But watch what the genuinely formidable do behind closed doors, and it looks closer to monastic. They ration. They train discomfort the way you'd train a muscle. Cold over warm, hunger over fullness. The hard conversation over the easy avoidance. Not out of self-denial for its own sake, but because they understand exactly the mechanism we just walked through. They're protecting the engine. They keep their wanting sharp on purpose, because a sharp want is the source of everything they've ever built, and they refuse to let the world dull it for free. They've figured out the one move the soft man never makes. They say no to pleasures they could easily take. Not all of them, not forever, but routinely, deliberately, as discipline. They leave the easy reward sitting on the table and walk past it, precisely because that ability is the rarest form of power there is. It's the gap between the lion that walks past a carcass because it isn't hungry on its own terms and the animal that eats whatever's put in front of it. One owns its appetite, the other is owned by it. And that's really the question underneath everything here. Not whether you can get pleasure. Pleasure has never been easier to access in human history. It's delivered straight into your hand around the clock. The real question is whether you can still say no to it. Whether, when the easy hit is sitting right there, free, frictionless, asking nothing of you, you still have the one muscle left that lets you choose not now. If you do, you're dangerous in the way that actually matters. If you don't, if you genuinely can't remember the last time you turned down a pleasure that was available to you, then somewhere along the way, quietly, pleasantly, without a single shot fired, you were already fed. 25 centuries ago, the historian Herodotus closed his entire history with a small, strange scene. The Persians had just become the most powerful people on earth. They'd conquered everything in reach. Some of their nobles approached King Cyrus with a reasonable suggestion. Now that they ruled the world, why keep living in their harsh, rocky homeland? Why not relocate somewhere rich and soft, somewhere fitting for conquerors? Cyrus heard them out and told them they could, but they needed to understand the cost. Soft lands, he said, breed soft men. Fertile ground and great warriors don't come from the same soil. Move to the easy country, he warned, and prepare to stop ruling and start serving. Herodotus chose to end his life's work not on a battle, but on that warning, because he'd watched the entire arc play out. He knew exactly where comfort leads a people who've forgotten what made them strong, and he knew it always feels, in the moment, like the obvious and reasonable choice. Of course we should move somewhere better. Of course we've earned the easy life. Of course the whole point of the struggle was to finally get to rest. The Persians listened that day. They chose to remain rulers on the harsh mountainside rather than become servants in the comfortable valley. That was the day they were still strong. You make a version of that same choice every day, and no one announces it. No noble shows up at your door. Just the soft thing, sitting there, asking nothing of you, and a quieter and quieter voice asking whether you're still the kind of man who can walk past it. The lion was never killed. It was fed. The only question left is whether it still remembers it was ever a lion. If you made it this far without reaching for your phone once, that already tells you something. You're not the soft man this was written about. You're the one looking for the way out of it. Drop a comment with one word, the thing you're done feeding for free. Let it sit there as proof you're already different from the man who scrolled past this.